Hey guys, so this is going to be story time about how I started a fire while me and Sophie were at home and Eric was at work. Alright, so this happened maybe a month ago, I think a month ago, and whenever it happened, I told people that I started a fire, and then I also put it on my Snapchat. And some of my coworkers were like, you should probably make a video about that. That's kind of something interesting to watch. And I was like, okay, I guess. So here I am. Boy, was it interesting. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and subscribe before I start telling you my lovely, interesting story. Go ahead and also follow me on Instagram at @melambient. And I think that's it. Yeah, I think that's it. Alright, so Eric had left for work and I was hungry. So I was making some bacon. Yes, I know, very stereotypical that I was making bacon and I started a grease fire with bacon. It's like nothing original. And I just flipped the bacon over, and I don't know if when I flipped the bacon over some grease got into the drip pan, which by the way I had cleaned like the day before. So I flipped over the bacon because it was just popping, and the popping sound scares me, so usually I just flip it over and it stops popping. And I flipped it over and the drip pan catches on fire. And I'm like, well crap. So that's happened to me before. Whenever your drip pan is dirty, some grease gets into it, it just gets on fire. But that's it. So I just grabbed the pan, and as I grab the pan, the whole thing goes into flames. And I'm like, what in the world? So I have it in my hand and it's just on fire, the whole entire thing. And I'm like, I start freaking out, and then I still have it in my hand, and I'm trying to move to the sink so I can put it out. And then the canisters that are on the on top of the stove, what's that called, the fan, it has canisters so that it if there's a grease fire like that, they pop, and it's some white powder, and it popped, and they made a very, very loud noise. And Sophie started screaming, not because it freaked her out. It popped. It freaked me out. I think I even screamed because I didn't know what was popping. I thought it was the walls or the cabinets cracking. I don't know what was happening. So I still have it in my hand, and when the canisters popped, since it was in my hand, it splashed some of the grease that was on fire onto the floor. So now the floor was on fire. I had a super hot pan in my hand that I just put in the sink, and then that was out, but now the floor was on fire, and Sophie was screaming. So I'm like, oh my goodness. So I grabbed my phone, grabbed Sophie, and I just ran outside. Now the parking lot usually has 0 people in there. No one hangs out in the parking lot. We live in some townhomes. No one just randomly hangs out in the parking lot. And I run outside with Sophie. I'm wearing a sports bra and some shorts because I'm just chilling at home. And I run outside. There's these 3 guys outside, and I just started screaming at them, and I have Sophie in my hip, and I'm like, oh my gosh, can you guys please help me? I just started a fire. And they start running towards me when I'm like, oh my gosh, can you guys please help me? And then I say, I started a fire, and then there's just black smoke just coming out from the door. And they're like, oh, bleep. And then they're like, okay, where is it? And I'm like, in the sink and like on the floor. So they run in here. I wouldn't have ran in here, to be completely honest. I just would have been like, is everyone out? Do you have pets? No? All right, call the fire department. But no, they ran in here. They opened the back door and they put out the fire. And then like 5 seconds after, like one of them like runs in here, they run back out and they're like coughing. And then I'm like, is it bad? And then they just kind of just point at the black smoke. And I'm like, oh no, it's bad. And I'm over here thinking, I burned down our townhome. Then what if I burned down the part, like the townhome that's right next to ours? Because, you know, townhomes are like close together. And they're just like, yeah, don't go back in there. And I'm like, oh my goodness. My phone is like dying. So they put the fire out, and you know, I'm so smart, and I'm like, do you think I should call 911? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, because I didn't think it was that bad. I was like, it's just a grease fire. It just, you know, just some got on the floor. But I called 911 and I was like, it's not an emergency, like it's not. And they were like, okay, what's wrong? And I was like, I started a small little grease fire. And the lady, the dispatcher is like, okay, who was in the house? And I was like, okay, so me and my daughter were in the house, but we're already out and the fire is out. And I was like, it's not an emergency. I just don't know what to do after I start a fire and the stupid, what's it called? The fire alarm was just going off and off and off. And the lady was like, all right, but are you guys okay? And I'm like, yeah, we got out like right away. And I put the fire out and everything. And she was like, okay, well, the fire department's on the way. And I'm like, okay, but it's not an emergency. Because I was like, you know, like, in my opinion, if it's not an emergency, I don't need that much, like, I don't need people to come. I just like, you know, just 1 or 2 fire people and, you know, check it out, be like, okay, you didn't like severely break anything, you can go back inside. Because I had never started a fire before. So I'm like, okay, and I'm waiting. The guys that helped me, they're like, yeah, call the fire department. And then I have no clue who they were. Honestly, now that I look back, they were very sketchy. But hey, thank you for helping me out. So they, as I was waiting for the fire department, I was blowing up my parents' phone, but they were camping, so they had no service. I was blowing up Eric's phone, but he was at work and they were super busy, so he wasn't answering the phone. And I'm like, oh my goodness. I wasn't even freaking out, but I was like, you know, I don't want Eric to be like, oh, why didn't you call me? And the fire department comes and you can hear them. They got here super fast and there's still smoke coming out of the house. And the fire department gets here and then it's a fire truck. And I'm like, okay, cool. So it's just a fire truck. Then another fire truck. Then 2 EMT ambulances things. I don't know what they're called. And then like 2 of just like the fire department cars. And I'm just like, oh my goodness. And I'm just like looking around and I'm the nosy neighbor. So if there's a cop outside or something, I'm usually the one that like kind of walks outside or opens the blinds so I can like be super nosy and see what's happening. So people started to come outside and they just started to stare. They didn't even come up to me and ask me if I was okay, if what happened. No, they're just staring. And I'm like, okay. And I had a kid, like baby Sophie is like right like there in my arms and no one's like, are you okay? Except for the guys that like ran and helped me. But all these people are here. There were at least like 20 firefighters just walking and just talking to me, and I'm like, oh my goodness. And I felt so bad because I was like, we put the fire out and it's okay, and they're just like, okay, that's no problem, we're just gonna check. And then they come in here, and I hadn't came in here since like I ran out, so I didn't know, like I really honestly did not know how bad it was. And then I was like, then the first firefighter that went in, he comes out, and I'm like, is it bad? And he's like, yeah, it's pretty bad. And I'm like, oh man. And they're like, then they start asking me if I have somewhere to stay. And I'm like, in there? And they're like, no, like, do you have somewhere else to stay? And I'm like, oh my goodness, is it that bad? And then I was gonna come back in, but they wouldn't let me come in because, one, I had Sophie in my hand. Two, they were starting to get these really big fans to get the smoke out. And then they opened like all the doors and all the windows and everything. And like they're just like coming in and out. And then one of the EMTs come up to me and they're like, do you need to be checked out? And I'm like, what? And they're like, yeah, it was pretty bad. I went in there. Do you need me to check you out or baby Sophie? And I was like, I just look at myself and I'm like, okay. Like I look at my hand, the hand that I had like the high pan on, and I'm like, I guess, can you check Sophie? And I just stick Sophie out, and they're like, yeah, come over here. So he makes sure that Sophie's breathing okay, making sure that like she didn't inhale any smoke, which I guess she didn't because she was perfectly fine. Then he's like, do you want me to check you out? And I was like, no, I'm fine. I'm just, what is happening? There were so many firefighters over here. And then they like were like, yeah, so you need somewhere to stay. I don't think you can stay in there because of the baby and the canisters that blew, that white powder. If she like inhales that or even like touches it and it gets in her mouth, like it could cause some serious problems. And I'm like, ugh. My parents are camping, my boyfriend's at work, and my phone is dead. And you know, I at least know my boyfriend's number because, you know, I mean, that's baby daddy, so he needs to, so I know his number and I know my parents' number. Other than that, I'm like, I don't really care. So I'm just like staring and I'm like, oh my goodness. And there's so many firefighters, and I just keep, every single person that comes up to me, and I'm just like, I'm so sorry, it's not an emergency. And they're like, no, it's fine. And they were all just laughing and talking, and I'm like, oh my goodness. Then, to make me feel even worse, they give Sophie this like really big like pink cover, because I mean, like, she was just in a diaper, like we're both basically naked. And like they wrap her in it, and then they just like give her to me, and I'm like, okay. Then they give her a freaking Minnie Mouse, and I'm like, it wasn't an emergency. Like, I just felt so bad. I was like, if something serious is happening around here and they don't get there fast enough, it's gonna be all my fault. And they're all like, they were all really nice, but I'm still in the fact that I started a fire and they're telling me that I can't sleep here. So it was like literally two and a half hours later until they finally started leaving. And then it was just the one fire truck. And then the one fire truck like stays for about another 30 minutes. And they're like, yeah, so we're gonna have to call maintenance and, you know, give them our report and stuff. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, yeah, so do you know maintenance number? What? No. Am I supposed to have that? So they keep telling me that I can't stay here. And obviously, I mean, I'm 20 years old. I look super young and I got a baby. So they're over here like, are you sure you're okay? Do you need us to call anyone? And I'm like, nah, I'm fine. I'm cool. And just a little bit freaking out because you're telling me that I can't sleep here tonight. But I guess I'm fine. And they're like, yeah, and then they show me what's happened, and the whole fan, like, is broken. It's still broken. The whole wall is, like, black charcoal, like, gross and bubbly, and the cabinets are all like really like black, like you can see where the fire just started to like build. Then there's like a patch on the floor and it's just melted, and my trash can caught on fire, and I was like, oh, I started a fire. Like, I think that was the moment that I realized that I started a fire with my child in the house. And then I broke down. I just started crying. I like came in here and really looked at everything, and I just started crying. I had Sophie in my hand, and like tears just started pouring down my face. And then I called Eric, and Eric finally answered, and I'm like, I started a fire, and why weren't you answering the phone? And like I was freaking out. And then I guess it freaked him out, obviously, because I'm over here crying, telling him I started a fire and that he didn't answer the phone. And I basically hated him because he didn't answer the phone. And then I'm just crying, and I'm like, I started a fire and my kid was in the house. So after like 5 minutes later of talking to Eric and me done being crying, I'm like, oh crap, I freaked Eric out. So I called Eric, and he was just like, yeah, I'm on the way. And I'm like, no, I'm fine. Sophie's fine. I'm so sorry. It was not that bad. I had a little mental breakdown because I started a fire with a kid in the house, and it was not that bad. It was just a grease fire. So he was like, okay, but I'm still on the way. And he gets here, and he like kind of looks, and he didn't know that it was a grease fire. He thought it was like one of the candles that like just tilted over. But he looks in and he just starts laughing, and he was like, Mel, do you know where the fire extinguisher is? And I was like, yeah, I didn't think. He's like, why didn't you grab it? And I'm like, look, everything happened too fast and your daughter started screaming. I don't care if this place would have burned down, but your child was screaming and we were both inhaling smoke. I grabbed her and I ran. And like after like the next day we kind of laughed about it, but I was still freaking out, and like I just felt like a super bad mom because I started a fire with Sophie in here. And I think that's it. I think the most adult thing out of that situation was when maintenance came and the manager came, and they were like, yeah, so you're just gonna have to file an insurance claim with your rentals insurance. And then I'm like, okay, no problem. I had to call my parents and ask them what they were talking about. They're like, yeah, you know what you pay monthly for like $17? That's probably gonna go up because they're probably gonna charge you like thousands of dollars. And I'm like, so yeah, that was interesting. But that is the story on how I started a fire with Sophie in the house. And I had to call the fire department for the very first time. I had to call 911 for a semi-actual emergency. Can't believe I started a fire. I still can't believe I started a fire. But yeah, that's what happened, and that's my story. And hopefully it never happens again, because that was interesting and I didn't like it. But yeah, hope you guys liked this video. I know it was a very random video, and I'm very sorry. And I know I'm laughing about it and it's funny to me now, but at the moment I was terrified and I felt like a super bad mom, and I was a little bit depressed because I started a fire. And I did put it on my Snapchat like the day later, because obviously there was like a huge mess in here because I wasn't allowed to touch anything without the apartments like doing a full report. But it was scary, and it makes you feel like a bad parent whenever something happens that you could have avoided. And it was very depressing. And to everyone that reached out to me after the fire and made sure that I was okay, thank you, and you guys really made me feel better because I knew I had people checking up on me. So, yeah. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment down below.